Hey there, I'd like to run my deflector dish down your warp manifold, if you know what I mean. I hope that was a good metaphor, and I didn't just say something really weird. I probably said something really weird. Oh god, what have I done? What have you done to me, Lower Decks? Hello, interwebs! It is time for my favorite week thing of it. My favorite thing to do every week, which is to review Star Trek Lower Decks episodes, and today we are reviewing the 7th episode of Season 2, Where Pleasant Fountains Lie. And before we get to my spoiler-free discussion as per usual, and then into the spoilers discussion section, I'm going to address the elephant in the room. Yes, this uniform is supposed to have like a purple collar thing with the pips. I lost it. You can throw me in the brig. I understand. I don't know where it went, but it does kind of go with the sexy feel of this episode, or not sexy feel, I guess, but that gets into our spoiler-free section, so let's get into it now that I've addressed the no collar in the room. Anywho, spoiler-free thoughts up front. I really enjoyed this episode a lot. I do have one major nitpick with it, though, and I'll get to that in a second. But on the plus side of this episode, we basically have two plots that are very much dealing with two disparate, yet very, very Star Trekian tropes. On the one side, we have a really fun story revolving around Rutherford and Billups, the chief engineer of the Cerritos, which is actually fantastic because we haven't really gotten a ton of Billups all that much, even in Season 1, and especially not at all really in Season 2, so it's nice to finally actually get some stories that flesh him out as a character. But not only that, the story is actually making fun of a TNG trope, which is the Laxwana Troi episode, the sort of like Deanna Troy's mother who would always come in and annoy Picard, always kind of wanting to sleep with him and get with him, and very boisterous and over the top. I always loved why can I not say her? Laxana. I do not know why I can't say her name today. I love her and adore her, played by the amazing Majel Barrett every single time, and her character was one that always had a lot more depth to her than you would initially appear, especially in some of the later episodes that she appeared in and in Deep Space Nine. Anyways, that's getting off track because that's a whole other discussion, because here in Lower Decks, we're very much dealing with that trope because we have Billups' mother showing up, who is trying to trick Billups into, I won't say what if you haven't gotten to the spoiler-filled section yet, but basically trying to do some Laxana sort of, shenanigans to him, which is a lot of fun, and again, is very much building up him as a character and getting us to know a little bit more about Billups, and also putting Rutherford outside of his comfort zone, as well as kind of evolving the Rutherford-Tendi relationship in small and subtle ways. And it's something that I'm really liking with this season overall, is just the subtle character progression that we're seeing within this, and that is continued within this episode. So I really enjoyed everything there, and we'll talk more about that in spoiler section. And on the other side of the episode, though, we have another Star Trekian trope, which is the evil computer trope, which you saw a lot in especially the original series and the Next Generation. But this time, the evil computer is played by none other than the wonderful Jeffrey Combs, who is, of course, the actor who has appeared in multiple roles across Star Trek. My two personal favorite being Wei Yun in Deep Space Nine and also Shran in Star Trek Enterprise, but he's played many more across numerous shows. So it's nice to see him back here as the evil computer. He does an absolutely fantastic job, but that sort of trope is being used in another Star Trek trope, which is the crash on a planet and having to deal with character interactions and two characters sort of coming to terms and blows with each other. Again, another Star Trekian trope, this time between Mariner and Boimler. And I really enjoyed this section of the episode for Boimler. I think this episode built a lot off of what was going on this whole season, but especially last episode, where we started to see Boimler really coming into his own as a leader. And this episode is really leaning into showing us that he has come very, very far and has developed from the guy that we knew him way back in the first episode of the first season. And I really enjoyed that. We'll talk more about that in the spoiler section, but the one thing I have to put in my spoiler-free section is the other side of that, which is Mariner. I was kind of a little upset at how Mariner was used in this episode because, again, we'll have to talk a little bit more in the spoiler section, but the way she was used here made me kind of dislike her and kind of pissed me off a little bit about her, and that would be fine, that's okay, but the episode at the end of it doesn't really address some of the stuff that I kind of was bothered by. It kind of just glosses over it, and I think she needed to be called out a little bit more for it. We'll talk a little bit more about that in a second, but that is my major critique with this episode. I really just was not pleased with how this character utilized and didn't critique Mariner, and ultimately kind of like yada yada a lot of the stuff here, and I really hope it comes up later on down the line in the season, because otherwise I'm a bit frustrated by it. But all that being said, I overall really enjoyed the episode. I thought it was really great, other than my big Mariner critique, and so to talk more about it, we're going to get into spoilers. So pull up your Paramount Plus or your VPNs or whatever you're using to watch the show, and do that thing, because we're getting into the spoilers right now. Okay, so since I like to not end on negative stuff, let's begin the spoiler-filled section with the Mariner and Boimler storyline here. So we get the wonderful opening bit with the Cerritos has landed on a planet that is helping them deal with like a evil computer that has taken over, again, voiced by Jeffrey Combs. I love the little jokes here with Captain Freeman saying, like, well, at least you didn't believe it was supernatural. And then you see the mural in the background, and it was clear that this civilization was worshiping the evil computer. I'm going to call him the Combs computer, because that just sounds fun to me. That was a whole really funny bit, and then sort of easily just the setup of the evil computer trying to trick Commander Ransom into like getting him to plug into a computer, sort of setting up that trope for the evil computer just trying to trick people around him to get him to plug in. That was wonderful. I also really liked when we get back up to the bridge, Captain Freeman saying, like, I don't know why I always do like the street food with different planets. It's always a roulette wheel. That was a great little line. Continuing on in the episode though, we basically learned that Boimler was going to be assigned to do this like big centipede mission. There's some funny little jokes about wet work. It was like, what? The work was wet and it was work. I don't know what you're talking about. And Boimler sort of setting up that he constantly references, like, I got to do all this stuff on the Titan, and I really grown from my time on the Titan. As again, we've clearly seen throughout the past few episodes, and Mariner kind of being frustrated by that. It's like, why do you keep bringing that up? All that worked really well for me, but it turns out Boimler got reassigned to go on the same mission with Mariner, where Mariner is going to take the evil computer back to the Daystrom Institute back on planet Earth, which of course upsets Boimler because he's missing out on a chance to like show his chops as a potential commander on the Centipede mission, which I want to see that planet, by the way. I want to see the Centipede planet. It kind of makes me think there was actually a comic book series that featured like a Centipede planet that was actually really cool with Kirk and crew. It was a great comic series. I'd have to look it up to remember the name of it, but it's good. I read too many Star Trek comics anyways. Moving on, Mariner and Boimler are heading out on the shuttlecraft, but they get pulled into, I think, like a gravitational eddy or whatever, some science mumbo jumbo, and crash land on a planet. Typical Star Trekian trope of the crash shuttle, and now these two characters kind of have to deal with their issues while also surviving a terrible situation, while also having to deal with evil Jeffrey Combs' computer, who is trying to trick them to get him to plug into the shuttle and give him some power. Really great. I just love all of this dynamic. It was absolutely really, really funny to see the computer and Mariner and Boimler constantly bouncing off of each other. My favorite running gag of this whole bit was when they were going to the replicators, and the only thing it would replicate was black licorice black. Black licorice is nasty. I do not understand how people like that stuff. It is gross, absolutely gross, and that would be my hell if that was all that was there. Obviously, this just continues to escalate. We get some more like kind of like normal like tropes and jokes out of this. Like there's a monster that comes and eats their food because the evil computer sort of talks too loud, sort of exacerbating their frustration. Then we get another sequence where they go and look for water, and they find some fruit, and Boimler's kind of showing off a little bit, being like, hey, I learned how to climb this tree, I can do this, and Mariner being kind of resentful of that fact that Boimler has gotten some independence. Now, I want to be clear right up front here, because like I said in my spoiler-free section, I do have criticisms of where things go with Mariner, but I want to make sure I express that I don't think the choices that Mariner makes in this episode, the way she is reacting, is out of character for her or bad for her. It makes actually a lot of sense to me that Mariner, who is someone who so kind of defined herself last season as the Chadich, the mentor of Boimler, would kind of end up being a little bit resentful of the fact that Boimler has become so much more independent from her, that he can kind of take care of himself and doesn't necessarily need her to be a mentor anymore. And I can understand where that resentment would come from within her character. This even makes more sense after what we saw in episode 3 of this season, where Mariner talked to Tendi about the fact that she's always worried about people abandoning her, using her and getting to know her, and then ultimately leaving her, like Boimler did when he went to the Titan. So we see that this is kind of a trauma point for the character, that this is something that repeatedly happens to her, and she's kind of very sensitive to it. So for her to see Boimler becoming more independent, especially after everything we saw last season, and especially after what we talked about in episode 3 of this season, makes a lot of sense for her to be upset. That progression makes absolute perfect sense for me. And I liked seeing it here, and I like seeing their frustrations start to come out in this moment where Boimler is trying to get the fruit down from the tree. And I loved the bit where he knock it down and they eat the fruit, and it just also tastes like black licorice. That was absolutely wonderful. And they obviously get frustrated at the evil computer and bury him, started saying, "No, I have rights!" That was a great bit, and they go and save him from the crabs. Boimler saves him from the crabs, and the Coombs computer shows Boimler that Mariner actually was the one that got him switched to this away mission, sort of like telling Ransom that, oh, Boimler's not ready to be on this type of mission, sort of lying about it so that Boimler would end up being with her and be reliant on her, as opposed to Boimler getting off to go and show his chops as a commander. Again, this is a moment that makes sense for me as a character, her as a character, and it's something I could see her doing because of her, like, need, but I will say this is something that makes me dislike her. This is something that is really bad for her to have done, to try to stymie the career of her friend when he's really excited about something. And again, it makes sense for her character, but it does make me want her to be criticized and called out for it. And the episode does start to do that. So I'm on board for all of this so far. And I'm really, again, liking this progression of her character. But then this leads to a falling out between them. Mariner obviously denies that she did that this was just the computer tricking her, but then Boimler follows after her, and she lets slip that, yeah, she did actually do that, and Boimler sort of shoots her with a phaser. Great moment. Again, I bought it. I bought that they would have come to blows there, but I really liked what it ultimately meant, because that did feel a little bit out of character, that he would shoot her for something like that he wouldn't be cooler-headed, especially with so much progression that we've seen as his character being much more of a commander. But then he gets on the ship, plugs in the evil computer, because we seem to believe that the evil computer has tricked him into trusting him, and the evil computer's like, ah, yes, I will take over the galaxy and ruin the sector and kill everybody. You have trusted me. And it's a great, like, over-the-top moment. And then obviously it's revealed that Boimler's like, no, I was tricking you the whole time. I kind of called that was going to be the case, but I liked it, and it was just a really fun moment, and it was sort of showing Boimler shot Mariner, went over the top because he was trying to trick the evil computer and make the evil computer trust him, and that the evil computer's only ever hooked up to the dimmer switch. He's like, I'll blind you, and just flicks the light on and off. That was hysterical. This, however, does bring me to where my big negative is, because at that moment, Boimler just, like, fist bumps Mariner, and they sort of, like, it seems like all is forgiven. And this is what bothers me. Again, Mariner stymieing Boimler's career kind of makes me angry at her, and it does bug me that Boimler kind of lets her off for it. Because this character progression all makes sense for me. It makes sense that she would be jealous. It would make sense that Boimler would be angry at her about it. And the fact that it's sort of yada 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 a little bit at the end of this episode, and I don't mind that Boimler even plays it up for the evil computer's benefit, but for him to completely forgive her for that moment feels too easy. It feels too easy, and it just leaves me in this state of like, oh, I dislike something that Mariner does. It kind of makes me hate her a little bit in an understandable way. It comes out of her character, but she wasn't criticized enough for it in this episode, and it kind of leaves me a little bit frustrated with not just Mariner as a character, but the episode for sort of letting her get away with it. And so I hope that this is something that gets brought up, and I trust Lower Decks enough that this is an arc that's going to be coming back up. I just wish there was a little bit more of a punctuation on it in this episode, a little bit more of a dot on it, because there is one more scene where the evil computer's like, oh, I'm going to be in Starfleet, I'm going to try and join Starfleet, that sort of thing. Again, one last trick, and I wish they had used that to not do that joke, but put a better punctuation between Mariner and Boimler, and it doesn't really do that. But then the computer gets dropped off at the Daystrom Institute, which, by the way, looks just like the Daystrom Institute as we saw in Star Trek Picard, which makes sense timeline-wise, but it was just cool to see that sort of congruity between different versions of Trek. And the evil computer put aside a bunch of other evil computers that looked like evil desktops and things like that. That was all great. So ultimately, I really enjoyed the story. I thought there was some really great stuff here in development for the characters, especially showing Boimler really having grown and become more independent. I was just a little upset with how they didn't really critique Mariner enough. But let's roll over to the other part of this episode that I really have almost no critiques of. I just have a lot of stuff that I really, really love, because we learn that Billups' mother is always trying to show up on the ship to try to trick Billups into having sex, because Billups is actually the heir to the throne, and if he has sex at any point in his life, if he loses his virginity, he will have to go back to the throne and become king. That's sort of the deal there. Also, I'm recording this from the future because I want to make clear, because I didn't make it clear enough when I was actually recording this review, that the idea of someone tricking a character into having sex, specifically even a parent character, as is the case with this storyline with Billups, can have a lot of problematic overtones to it. However, for me personally, and this does not have to be for you because I understand everyone's different line is going to be different with this type of storyline, this one actually worked for me within this episode for two distinct reasons. The first of which being that, number one, the episode makes it very clear that this is a bad thing for the mother to be doing. While it is played for laughs and there is sort of like jokes to it, the episode does not sort of mince words around the fact that, like, no, Billups being tricked into sex by his mother is a bad thing and should not happen, and that Billups is just much more sort of like over it and not caring about it and isn't like personally traumatized by it, but it's just sort of like, yeah, this is a thing my mother does, it's kind of annoying, and yeah, of course it's a bad thing. So there's that element of it. The second reason why I think this works personally for me is that the show doesn't actually go into detail about what the specifics of those events were. It could have just like been her trying to set him up on a date, trying to meet a sexy girl or guy or non-binary person for him to go on a date with. So it's kind of left implied how dark the things that his mother was trying to do were in order to get him to have sex. So I think because of those two specific reasons, this sort of idea of Billups' mother trying to trick him into having sex with someone so that he'll have to come back and reclaim his throne, while could be considered problematic, and I certainly don't fault anyone for taking issue with it, I think works for me just because of the way that the episode handles it and brings it up. Now, if we somehow learn that there was something really, really horrible that Billups' mother did in order to try and trick him into a sexual situation against his will, and the show sort of glosses over that and doesn't actually like put the actual like, no, this is bad sort of distinguisher on it, then I'll have a greater problem with it. But as it's presented in this episode, I did not have a specific problem with this trope, but I do feel like it was something that I needed to address within this review. So I just wanted to say why I felt like this worked for me, even though I understand it not working for everyone, and why this could be potentially a problematic storyline for the show. This is a very Star Trekian trope, the sort of like, oh no, I'll have to go back and lose the thing that I love because Billups just really loves engineering so much and he doesn't want to give up on that. And so I liked this sort of Trekian trope coming in here. And then I loved going over to the other ship, the the ship that he's trying to go and help his mother because his mother's ship is dealing with some engineering problems. And I love like that it's basically a modern fantasy ship. They like name stuff like after dragons and the elf manifolds or whatever. And there's torches on the thing that the dock that connects to the ship was really clever and really cool, and there's like a bard dancing around. All of that was wonderful, and I enjoyed the like sex innuendos that the girls said as they were going by, always trying to like get Billups to like have sex, but Billups just really cares about the warp manifolds and all that stuff, and Rutherford has to come along as well, and he feels out of his comfort zone. He doesn't like going on another ship, he doesn't like going to see other things, and I like that Tendi's the one that sort of pushes him out of his comfort zone, that she's like, no, and she's the one that understands and talks him into doing it, even though he's kind of still stressed about it. And I really enjoyed that like development of their relationship. But obviously, as things go on, Billups saves the day, fixes the problem, and supposedly earns his mother's respect. She's like, oh, I understand now why you love engineering and don't want to become king. I understand. But then Billups goes back to the ship, and we see, after he tells Freeman that he's earned his mother's respect, there's a big explosion, supposedly killing Rutherford, which deeply upsets Tendi. And I knew that this was going to be one of those, like, Rutherford's probably most certainly alive moments. We see that all the time in Star Trek, Next Generation, Deep Space Nine, Voyager was like, oh no, the character's dead. Cut to credits, the character's clearly alive just a few scenes down the road. But it was nice to see Tendi's reaction to that and her being deeply bothered and upset by Rutherford, because obviously we see a growing romance between these two. And so I just liked seeing that sort of like moment of like, no, Rutherford's dead. And so Tendi starts to look for where, like, she just like, I want a piece of Rutherford, so she looks for his implant and finds that he's still alive. And turns out this was all a trick by Billups' mother to try and get Billups to, have sex so that he could become, so he could be on the throne, which was like a clever plan, to be honest, like really make him doubt his engineering skills, like build him up and then tear him down was great, because Billups is like, I can't be an engineer anymore, I killed a friend, I blew up part of my own people's ship, I have to just come back and be king because now my mother's supposedly dead, but obviously it was all a trick. So Rutherford has to run and go and stop Billups from having sex. And I have to say, I really liked this scene because Rutherford gets there and it turns out Billups just couldn't make it happen. And two things about this scene. Number one, Billups was going to have sex with a guy and a girl, kind of hinting at like in the future there doesn't really matter, no one really cares, like sexuality doesn't really matter, and Billups sort of doesn't care either way. But also I think that this is subtly hinting at the fact that Billups is asexual, which is nice to see representation of asexual character. Now, obviously, I don't think this is perfect representation, I should say, and by the way, I'm also not asexual myself, so I can't speak for that community on this front. I mean, obviously, there's a few things, like, obviously, there's sort of the joke that he couldn't get it up, so it's kind of laughing at that fact, or the fact that it's not explicit, or the fact that there's leaning into a little bit of the trope that Billups likes, like, engineering, and loves it just as much as he loves sex, sort of thing, or other people love sex, I should say. And so there's a little bit of the tropiness and some issues with that. That being said, however, and again, I am not asexual and can't speak for this community, but for my money, I was sort of like, oh, well, at least it's not like so intensely problematic or bad. And I like this idea that they could develop this more of Billups being asexual and really explore that and make that explicit down the line, kind of like how they did Mariner, where there was little hints of Mariner being bisexual, but then made explicit down the line. It doesn't have to be the thing up front. So there's obviously a longer conversation to be had about Billups being asexual and potential representation that he could be for that community. And I'm not the one necessarily to speak of whether it's perfectly good or perfectly bad, but I think that there is opportunity, I think is the best way to put it here, for him to be asexual. And I don't think that this was, again, there are problems, but so intensely problematic that I think it was bad representation. I think it could be turned into some really positive and good representation, but I don't think was perfect within this episode. But I think the ground has been laid in a cool way. So I thought that that was worth mentioning within this review, sort of like open up the discussion to it. Again, it's not a, oh, it's bad or it's good. I think it's a conversation, as always with things like this with representation. So I'll be curious to hear what other people think on that. And maybe that wasn't even the intention of the writers, but it's something that I was sort of thinking about with this character. But obviously a funny little bit. I also should say some other little pieces in this that I liked is I like the bard being able to like stop communicators by playing the whatever instrument that was. I couldn't think of the name of it. I was hoping it was coming to me by doing this, but it didn't. So it's whatever this instrument is. You got me. You understand. The bard thing. The thing that bards play. Also, I should say, I really love the line when Rutherford bounces in and he says, "Did his kingdom come?" That's a good joke. That's A+ on that one. A+ on that one. Whoever came up with that in the writer's room, like, you won. You absolutely won. Another thing that I should say that I really loved is I loved the design of the ship just on the outside, like the scaly, like fantasy design of this ship. Billups' mother's ship was absolutely fantastic. It was gorgeous. The animators outdid themselves on the look of that ship. And then the last little bit of this episode that I really deeply enjoyed was Tendi sort of talking to Rutherford after everything is said and done. And, Billups talks to his mother and says, go away, I hate you, sort of thing. But Tendi sort of says, like, oh, I guess I just have to get used to you possibly dying. That just is a Starfleet thing, as Rutherford says, that, we possibly die every week. And Rutherford saying, yeah, but you can handle that. And Tendi clearly being bothered by that. Again, sort of building up this, like, growing relationship and her caring for him, as opposed to last season where Rutherford was caring for her. So I'm really hoping that I'm really liking how they're teasing this out. I do hope, though, by the end of the season or sometime soon, they will start to actually make that literal, it's getting to the point where it's cute. I like the will they won't they aspect of it, but I'm wondering if it's time to will they or won't they. You know what I mean? I don't want it to be dragged out so long that it becomes redundant or overdone. I'm enjoying it here, but I think it's starting to run its course a little bit, but I'm liking the development of it through these episodes. But all that being said, I think at the end of the day, I really loved this episode. It was some great dissections of Star Trekian tropes, some nice nudges forward for our characters and really like pushing them in interesting ways, with Rutherford obviously like growing out of his comfort zone, Tendi really showing that she's starting to have more of a feelings for Rutherford, and Boimler really coming to his own as a commander, and Mariner, despite my reticence with how that storyline ended up with her not being enough critiqued, I do like seeing that she is resentful of the fact that other people don't need her anymore, which is something we know, as I said, we saw earlier in the season, is something that she's scared of. She's scared that people, needing her and then not needing her and then abandoning her. And that's what she's really afraid of. So it makes sense in the core of her character. My big problem, though, is it's not critiqued enough within the episode. And I really hope it comes back up, which I'm sure it will. I just wish it had a little bit more of a button, as I said, within this episode. All that being said, I think the episode is overall really strong, despite my one big criticism of it. And I really loved it. I deeply enjoyed it. So I'd love to hear all of your thoughts about this episode, though. Did you love it? Did you hate it? Were you frustrated as I was about the Mariner situation? Are you frustrated by the fact that I don't have my purple collar? I'd love to hear all of that down in the comments below. Don't forget to subscribe as well for more reviews of Star Trek Lower Decks and video essays on LGBTQ and other topics through geekdoms and fandoms. That's all here. I have a Patreon that you can help me out on as well. But beyond all of that, I just hope that you enjoyed yourself, you had a fun time, and I hope that you, as always, live long and prosper. Hey there. You...